So, welcome back, everybody. Nice to see your faces. Thanks for joining in on the sheep check-in. Great to know where we're all at. I definitely find this to be a pretty challenging time of year with, and just the pandemic era and just getting out of the darkest time of year. So, yeah, thank you all for being present today. Got one more icebreaker that you all can just participate in as we go along this morning. But if you have access to the chat, I'm also just curious, what's a word or phrase that comes to mind as you're thinking about your 2024 market season? So just another way for us to connect and check in this morning as we get along with the session.
Anticipated.
Anticipated. 2 words is okay. I said phrase. Great.
Where's the chat?
What was that? Refreshed. A great experiment. I feel that. Reaching new communities. Awesome. Cool. Cool. All of the things. I'm not going to share the screen, but I am just going to throw our Jamboard community agreements in the chat. I'll call out a few of our community agreements. And feel free, that Jamboard is editable, so you can add more to it. Why we are here, learning ways and strategies to encourage communication, learning how to be the intermediary in market conflicts, seeing no gossiping, be honest, direct, and kind to each other. Expect non-closure is a big one in this mediation and conflict world. Yeah. Just pause on that for a minute. And if there's anything anybody wants to add, you can just speak out loud or throw it up on that Jamboard. Cool. Not hearing anything. So just a few other reminders. We're here till 11 today. I'm expecting there to be some time at the end of this session for unstructured group discussion and processing of things. If you're currently in a conflict with a member of your market that's also on this call, thanks for both being here. And we definitely ask to not bring up those types of issues on this call. We are very much available for one-on-one coaching, technical assistance. And yeah, don't be shy to reach out to Andrew or I to get that started. So we've been apart for quite a while. Ideally, this was actually going to be our last session. Great time to end in January. Well, there's a lot of buffer for market planning, but we do have a new schedule that I'll share at the end of this call and make sure we're all aware of. So we have 2 more calls going into February. And yeah, lastly, just a reminder. So we're kicking off a systems building session, which is this education team you see here. So with systems building, we're really focusing on the underlying rules, processes, and norms at your market that prevent conflict or help you navigate it, or maybe cause conflicts sometimes. So that's the big focus for today. We had sent you a bit of homework to do that we'll be focusing on in 2 parts. One of the homework assignments was to look at your rules and bylaws and whatever other written systems you have in place as it pertains to vendors, everything from vendor intake, onboarding, to managing them, enforcing rules, removing them, all of the above. So we're and then the other homework assignment was to work on a conflict mapping worksheet where you hopefully, if you got a chance to do it, that's great. If not, I'll paste it in the chat so you can just take a look at it. But it's a great tool for just unpacking a conflict and trying, the idea is that this worksheet helps you identify those systems and structures, but it also helps you identify kind of what Karen and Leah focus on with the skills building, like where were there a miscommunication of values or just a plain miscommunication, or just what could have been done differently in how we approached it as people in not triggering emotions. So yeah, diving into today's focus. So our purpose for today's training is this. All markets experience issues with vendors. Many of them stem from structural failures within a market's rules, bylaws, processes, and norms. Together, we're going to identify strengths and weaknesses in our current market systems and discuss opportunities for improvements. We'll also discuss what happens when structures don't work to address an issue, because there's no silver bullets here. So Hannah's going to kick us off in a moment. I am curious, just a show of hands, like who here in your markets, and you can just type it in the chat too, but who, when you were looking at your bylaws and rules, who has like a process for an orientation when new vendors join the market, whether it's a document or like a meeting that happens that somebody is tasked with doing? Does anybody do that at their markets currently? A new vendor?
Yeah.
orientation?
I do.
Cool. The spring meeting, that's good. Dorset does not. Julia raised their hand. Is that just you virtually raising your hand? Cool. I'm seeing some yeses and some nos. Another on the onboarding front, do you all have a written process for voting in new members? I'm seeing some nods and some head shakes. Used to? No. Yeah. Great. Interesting. Yeah. Will be a lot to discuss on that.
I'm curious what you mean by how detailed a process. I think we have yeah, I'm just curious. I'm curious to see how detailed. I mean, we certainly have a process that says we need to vote in members. I'm not sure how much it spells out the way in which it goes into that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure. I don't know if there's a silver bullet answer for that, but definitely we've seen conflicts arise, right? Like if you're not following a process, then like how did you decide on who's in and who's out? And another question I had are like, is there transparency around that? Were notes taken? Because then just there's such an opportunity for bias in voting in new members, and yeah, having clarity and transparency in that process can definitely reduce the number of conflicts that could arise in the vendor voting in process. Yeah. Seeing a lot in the chat. Thanks. I'll have to catch up with that. Cool. So Hannah's going to give us a quick overview slideshow presentation on vendor relations and how they interact with market structures. And then we'll go into a group discussion on what we've found at our market so far. You want me to launch the slides right now, Hannah?
Yeah, sure. That'd be great. Thanks, Jimmy. So I want to just start off by saying what I want to talk about is how we can kind of lean on the structure, not what the content of the structure should be. I think very much that the content is up to the group that is there on the ground at the moment to work out and decide. So my answer is not necessarily it should always be a 2/3 vote to let vendors into the market or anything along those lines. Really more, let's talk about how a structure can be a kind of a building block for the markets. So we can have some great vendor relations, and a lot of that is being really proactive and being clear. Go ahead and forward the slide, Jimmy. So what I want clarity with is some of the things I want clarity with is how to get into the market, how to set up, how are we arranged, who determines that, why, and what are the rules that we need to follow, and are they readily available? That's just like, those are the core 3 things I think about with rules. Go ahead, Jimmy, forward the slide. They are really boring. Rules kind of suck to work through, and a lot of people feel like they're controlly, and there's a lot of negative feelings just about the word rules. So, you know, feel free to change that to guidelines or whatever you want to make it. You know, I don't think the word's the problem. I think how we treat them and our feelings around them tend to create the problems. We'll forward the slide. But the reason I see rules as really helpful is it's a path. It's a path that we can follow. It's a path to make change. It explains what the expectations are, and it's a place. I don't know if safe place or not. That's up to the people in the room. But it allows us to have some discussion and a framework to have that discussion within. Go ahead, Jimmy. Yeah. So one of the things that people are often asking me about is, you know, we have this rule, we don't love this rule, I'm having this conflict, whatever, you know, we're having this conflict, and I say, okay, do you have any rules around that conflict? No. Okay. Do you have a way to create a rule? No. Okay. Or you have a way to change a rule? No. So I think this is actually, how are we going to decide what to decide, is like the place to start every conversation on this. What are the ground rules, right? Jimmy just went over that for us. What are the ground rules of this? Are we going to be kind? Are we going to listen, you know, bring our best selves, all of those things? But what is the actual function of change? Do we need a quorum? What's a quorum? Do we need certain percentages of 50-50? So if we have 11 people in the room and 6 people want one and 5 people want the other, is that enough? You know, and that's up to you guys to determine. I can say that I don't love it when it's 51% of the people want a rule and it flies, because then you have 49% of your vendors who are unhappy with it. So it is important to decide how to decide. Forward. Rules do a lot for our expectations. We can, if there's a place when people don't know, people tend to have their worst behavior when there's question and uncertainty. That's really one of the things that gets confusing. So if there's a resource that people can go to get their answers, what can I sell? Do I have to ask someone, or can I just read this and say, okay, I did X, Y, and Z, I can do that? All of these questions are important in that. I'm just wondering, sorry, I see that there's some things coming up in the chat. Sure, yeah, and Dara's adding here, it's important to know the history of when and why rules were added to your market. Absolutely, super helpful. One of the things that I found was really important and really added to the back and forth of a conversation around rules is that in the markets I participate in, any vendor can initiate a rule change. There's a process for it, and that process is laid out how to do it. I like that. It doesn't mean you have to like that. It doesn't mean that your markets have to create that. But in that, it gives those rules more strength, because there is a process to change. There is a way that you as a member can have a voice about how things done. It doesn't mean that you can get the rule you want in, but you can certainly have a healthy discussion around it and maybe hear the point of view of why it's not happening or in place already. So we'll keep on moving forward. I think it's really, really, I'm just going to keep on saying, I think, I apologize for that. Rules can be very helpful. However, if nobody knows where to find the rules, they have very little use. If people have never accessed those rules, if they, we made the rules, we voted on the thing, they're on the website, you go to the website, I guess we missed the last update. That starts to really degrade the usefulness of them. If you make a rule intentionally vague or unintentionally vague, so people can't understand them, and it's like a feeling, oh, we're all going to be good sports about this. Like, everybody knows we can't do that. Like, any of those things, like, you hear it all the time, like, oh, do we really need to make a rule about that? Well, that's a question for you to make, right? Do you need to make a rule? So either make the rule or don't make the rule. That's up to the people in the room, but don't make a rule that no one can understand, right? Like, there are a lot of things that fall under good sportsmanship. You know, what does good sportsmanship mean? That's in the eyes of the beholder, right? And then again, if there are rules and everybody is they're not enforced at all. So there's that rule, but that I can't bring my dog as a vendor to market. And, you know, I see Joe has their dog every week at market and no one seems to care. So I can bring my dog to market. If you're going to let the vendors bring dogs to market, totally cool. That's fine. Whatever, you make that choice. However, take the rule out that says no dogs. You know, just remove it. Remove that rule. Keep your rules up to date. So they're important. They're pertinent. It seems like people are following those rules. Sorry, that's a big one for me. Keep on and go on there, Jimmy. I also, I'm just going to say, I always take the moment just to show off like as many pictures of my farm and my veggies as I possibly can in these. So sorry about that. There's my my display spam. We want to make sure that you can access them. Are they online? Are they easy to get to? Can anybody who's interested in joining the market review the rules before they join the market? You know, there are some vendors who don't participate in meetings. Are they having access to those? Maybe they don't have online access. Well, then let's make sure they get a copy sent to them on an annual basis. So it's the norm. They can refer to them. And so this is one that I used to really lean on a lot more than I do now, that every member must read them. That, yes, of course. But I also think it is okay to make it the responsibility of the vendor to read them. I don't think I need to chase it down and read it aloud to them. This is part of the market. Make it clear it's part of the market. Make it clear. Have it be an item that you reference on a regular basis. Have a copy. The market manager should have a copy in their truck or with them at market. So if it needs to be referenced, it can be. I used to do this, and I would just pop in each year a really big ticket item that people were like, what? They're doing what? Just to get the debate going and get people reading it and get people to market.
Anna, can you give an example? This is Leslie from the facilitation team. Can you give an example of just like what you'd throw in there to see if people were reading?
Oh, sure. In Portland, a great one was always, I think we should not buy in any items whatsoever. So boom, right? There are people who make thousands of dollars off of buying in strawberries or high bush blueberries or things like that at market. If I say, I think I want to make it a no buy-in market, or we're going to change the setup. So it's as you pull in, that's how you set up, not assigned spots. So those are two really big ticket items that are going to get people thinking, what else is that crazy lady trying to change in these rules? Don't do that assuming that won't pass. All right. So you could make it and it could really spark a big debate and really change the market. So careful what you wish for there, but it certainly does make quite a bit of difference. Thank you, Leslie, for suggesting that. All right, Jimmy, we're going to move on. I think we've already covered that, you know, not be vague, keep them up to date, change them. If they get changed, change it on all of the different places they're available. So one of the things that I think a lot about is how many rules we have, right? Like you get more engagement, you get people, well, if we're gonna have this rule, I'd like this rule, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can get very, very ruly very quickly. And if they're used and maintained and enforced, they're really useful and they can really guide the market. That has a lot to do with who's available at that moment. So if you have all these rules and nobody follows them, some are important, some are less important. You have to treat them all as important and maintain them. If not, then the important ones are going to lose their oomph, I guess, what I say. So I think of it a lot like a trellis tomato. If I start trellising my tomatoes and then I get like 2 weeks where I don't get to them, all of a sudden, most of the stems are broken. A lot of the fruit is rotting. There's no airflow because I set this up, right? I set this up to have a ton of airflow and be pruned really aggressively. I'm expecting the air to be able to go through. If I don't prune them and I don't maintain them, then the air is not going to come through. And then it's going to be a big rotten mess. And it might have just been better if initially I said, okay, I'm not going to prune these. So I'm going to give them a lot more space. I'm going to manage it differently because I know I don't have the capacity to trellis aggressively. All right. I'm just going to check in here.
You got compliments on the photo.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yes, I love my tomatoes. Okay, yeah, so basically have follow through and create a system that seems reasonable. If it's not reasonable, catch it at the beginning instead of waiting until all your trellises are broken and your tomatoes are all rotten. Just move forward and be clear, follow those rules and work to enforce them. Keep on going. We already checked in on this. Leslie was asking about the hot button rules, and I think of them as the buy-ins, the space. Oddly, like you can get people who get like really worked up over whether or not you have to weight your tent and how that is. Mostly because if you enforce that, that means people are having to take tents down when there is greens out in plastic bags. So there's reasons, but if you are consistent about it, then people are going to remember their tent weights. And if they forget them, they're going to have backup plans in place. All right, keep on going, Jimmy. And for the main markets, I'm not sure exactly how all of the Vermont markets go, but in Maine markets, this is a cooperative effort for the most part. And so when we're having the bad guy, right? The bad guy is the market manager who has volunteered. And this is the thing I love to remind people. I volunteered to help us follow the rules that you helped create, right? Like, let's make sure that this isn't on one person. This isn't the market manager's fault that these rules exist. We went through a process to create these rules, and now we're going to follow them together. And I'm reminding you that we, as a group, voted on this rule. And so, here, an example of this for Leslie is one of our markets had a no buying before the start bell. And so customers would come and they would go to a vendor and try to buy, say, a loaf of bread. And then the person who wanted to sell a loaf of bread didn't want to be the bad guy, right? So they said, hey, Hannah, you're the market manager. Am I allowed to sell this loaf of bread? And as the market manager, I would say, well, you tell me, what was the end result of the vote we had as vendors? And so I would not answer, no, you cannot sell that loaf of bread. I would turn the question back around and say, we voted on this. Do you remember what the answer was to our group consensus? And because I don't think that it can very easily become, you're the bad guy because you're actually asking us to follow the rules that we all as a group set. Continue on. So a lot of that's just reminding how we process that.
Hannah, I see a question. What if rules are arbitrarily set by the manager and there's no opportunity for input?
So that's the how to change a rule, right? So if there are, when one is joining a market as a new member, one of the things I look at is what are the rules, and is this a cooperative market or is this not a cooperative market, right? When you're joining a market, you might not be joining a cooperative market, in which case you should be aware of that and aware of the downsides of it. If there is a way to change a rule and it's arbitrary, then I would follow that process and work to change it. Does that make sense? I can't quite see, Jimmy.
Yeah.
The question was mine, Hannah, and you kind of, the market is not a cooperative market. So what's happened in 2023 was there was one rule that one well-respected vendor said right up front in the beginning of the year. He goes, just so you know, I'm not going to follow this rule. And he was very brazen about it, but it gave us all permission to kind of challenge a few other things too. But it is not a cooperative market in any way.
Right. And so, I mean, there you go. There's a huge downside for me wanting to join that market. But I would also say there is a problem with having a rule that we are openly admitting we are not following. It is so much better to just get rid of that rule or modify it in a timely manner so it is something people can follow, because there's really very little point in having rules that nobody is following or are openly not following. Yeah. So again, for enforcement, I don't like seek it out to be a jerk. I make sure if I'm talking to somebody about a rule that's being broken, I don't do it in front of a bunch of customers. I always remind them when that is, here's where we keep the rules, here's where you can access them, and this is how and when these rules are changed. If you'd like to start the process, here's how to do it. But I do as little as possible of this at market. Really just let's refer back to the rules that we all agreed on. And I guess I should say, we all agreed on is if I join a market that has rules that don't have a way to change, like, yes, that might be a problem, but I'm also agreeing to those rules at that time. So let's go ahead and move forward. So one of the things that I really think is critical is while we are like creating these, it is it's a group of people working together, hopefully. But when I what I'm so interested by is I had two markets for a very long time that had almost 100% overlap in vendors, and both cooperatively run. And in one market, a problem could come up and the solution would be created. And then the same problem in this other market with the same group of people might come up, and we would collectively create a completely different answer. And that one always blew me away, but it is important to draw from other resources. The Farmers Market Coalition has this amazing anti-bias or anti-racist toolkit, which I think we would all benefit from reading, researching, and looking at further. But there are a lot of information right here in this room. A lot of folks who have had a lot of experiences, and we can draw from those collectively, and also look online at various different markets. And don't hold yourself to just markets in the state of Maine. Yes, there are a bunch in there that have stuff online, but there are a lot of other great resources. DAR has included some, I think, in your pre-work over the last couple months. And those are also just wonderful resources. So I'm just going to conclude here really quick with the idea is not so much for me to say what the rules should be, but for them to be maintained and to be a source to look for, to go back to find the structure, the process. And if those are not there, to create a way for them to be there, if that's possible in your group.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks so much. That's really the segue into where we're headed now, which is to take a few minutes. So we're going to spend a little time as a large group discussing, maybe up to 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to go into small group breakouts to give you an opportunity to really kind of audit and look at what you've got. What do you have in front of you, or the absence of what's in front of you and what could be developed. But for the moment, in a large group, would just like to hear from you all. What are you aware of? What have you found? What do you know? How do you communicate with your vendors? What is transparent and open? Like, do they know how to get in? How do you orient them? And we know you put some things in the chat, but curious for if folks just want to share about what any insights or that you're having about what you do have or don't.
I think in the chat, there's an important conversation going on about how sometimes rules are not just from the market. I know we have a lot of like we have to get a permit from our town. And so a lot of restriction and rules come from the town. And then our property is owned by a property management company, and they have their own rules and restrictions. So it may seem to a vendor that it is a structure coming from maybe the manager and the board, and it can be a lot more complicated situation. And maybe it's important to outline those rules in the rules where some of these restrictions are coming from.
Yeah, and I will say, sorry, on that note too, just that we're set up so that people, speak to the market manager, but the board supports the market manager. So in essence, we're the bad guy. The board is the bad guy, the group of people. And, we always say to our market manager, to Miranda, that, if she's coming up to a conflict, just kind of walk away at first, just walk away, if you can. And then we'll deal with it, just try to avoid the conflict, and, we'll address it as a board, because she's our front girl, and, we're in full support and keeping her safe. So I just wanted to say that. That's it.
Thank you. So yeah, this acknowledgement that rules come from different places. Hannah, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, I think that's super critical thing to remember. And also there does sometimes get to be a moment where you're like, actually, this is not for me to enforce, right? This is like, we're breaking the law right now. And then we need a different enforcement path than me, right? Like, just because you're a market manager or leading a market, it doesn't mean that you need to deal with every aspect that is going on. Like, it is probably also like, if it's not okay, it's not okay, right? And you don't need to be the enforcer of that. You can be a communicator instead. At that point.
Okay, other folks? And there was a lot about folks not having necessarily orientation. Does anybody have an orientation? And can you share with us what that's like?
I will say that we have a spring meeting, and that everyone is required to attend. Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of attendance. We do get the attendance from the new vendors though. So, and that, I feel is our representation, of the orientation of how the market works. And this is the place where you can ask questions as a new vendor. So, it doesn't really say that that's, our orientation, but I see it that way. But it might be maybe better to make it clear that, if you're a new vendor, returning vendor, the spring meeting is our orientation. Maybe we should add that to the verbiage, Miranda. Yeah. Thanks.
Well, and are there any markets, that's an interesting point, is that you don't have your more established markets may not come to that meeting. Does anybody else have a practice that has been successful to get everybody in one spot at the same time?
Food.
Kirsten?
So our market holds the spring setup meeting. It's when we go all to the area where we hold the market and we set up the big tents. We put out like markers for where all the individual spots are with tape that makes it so that everyone knows which spot is where and all that fun stuff. And then we go over the rules, kind of have an introduction and like talk about things like that. Also, you mentioned the tense waiting thing is a point of contention. Yeah, that's like probably one of the most heavily enforced rules, only because it's a very windy area, and the buckets of shame are in the closet, and you will be made to go to get them if you forget your own.
You're in Vermont. This was a big conversation, I think, last year. I remember the tents. There was some wind, there was some serious wind happening. Totally. Julia, you've got your hand up. Thank you, Kirsten.
Yeah, we have a required vendor meeting. When you sign your application, you're also signing saying like, I'm going to come to this mandatory meeting. It's for new and returning vendors. And I usually host the meeting on 2 different dates at 2 different times, just so everybody can fit in their schedule. But even if what I find we have an issue with is that even if like the vendors or the business owners come to the meeting, they're not always communicating everything from the meeting to their staff. So then it becomes this like second round of orientation that I have to do every time there's like a new staff member at the market at a different booth. And we've definitely been struggling with getting vendors to like ensure that everything we teach or we share in the orientation and everything that they get in their handbook actually makes it down to the staff that are working the booths at the market. And that's definitely been a tension point.
Well, this is really an opportunity for some group think and contribution here. Anybody work through that or seen that before? Like, okay, well, we've got one person who's coming to our meeting and that's great, but then information isn't filtering down. So are there any strategies, policies, procedures, structures to get the word passed to staff so that everyone is in the know? Kirsten?
Feed them. Give them free food, people will show up. That's how we solved our problem.
So the culture of the meeting itself has food. Yeah, nice.
I see Georgie and then Jill.
Yeah, we do it for staff that don't know or that aren't following the rules. We basically make it the responsibility of the business owner to share the rules with their staff. And so if their staff break the rules, it counts as a strike against the business. So we have like a 3 strikes and you're out rule. And so we'll like give warnings sometimes before they get an official strike, but we've seen it often where there's staff consistently breaking the rules, and eventually we'll just say like, this is a strike because we need your staff. There's too many staff coming to our market that if we can't explain it to everyone, so it's on the vendor.
Thanks, Georgie.
How about Jill? Yeah.
Yeah, oh, am I?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I do send out a vendor email once a week, and for a while I really wasn't onto that I had to add known staff, to that email. So now I do that, and that helps quite a bit. That wouldn't help if the staff changed every week, but we have, a few vendors that don't come to market. They send a staff person, and it's usually the same person for most of the season. So getting them on your email or however you communicate with your vendors is pretty helpful. It has helped us.
That's a great idea. Just widening that circle of communication on a regular basis.
I see Gretchen's got their hand raised.
Yeah, I actually am hired as staff for another farm's booth at a couple of farmers markets. And it's an older couple that are, retirement age, and they just don't have the energy to do markets anymore. And I'm very thankful that they have a very detailed list. And weights are a huge issue at a couple of the markets. Like, I would not be able to vend if I didn't have them. And one day I forgot the weights, and I remembered before I actually got to market and stopped and got big bags of kitty litter, which the market people joked and laughed, but it worked and they were happy with it and all was well. But I think as an employee, if the vendor has a detailed list, like before I eat, as I'm loading the van and as I'm gathering everything up, there's a very detailed list, and they make sure all of us that go to different markets, we all have different clipboards, and they highlight specific rules at each market that we need to make sure that we don't get them in as a business in trouble on. So that communication factor, I think, is good. It's hard. I mean, as a business owner myself, sometimes you're harried, but they've taken the time to have a very orderly, structured system for us.
Thanks, Gretchen. And hi, Gretchen. Hannah, we'll finish up with last comment here for Hannah.
Yeah, I just wanted to wrap back around. I think it was Bridget who mentioned she had meetings that had really poor attendance. And I think that that's a really common thing. There's a lot of things that have been tried to get vendors to come to market meetings, market meetings. And I really focus on making those meetings worth the vendor's time. I'm not going to ask vendors to come to those meetings if they don't apply to them. So if there's a new member orientation, I will make it known that they are welcome to come, but a vendor who's been there for 25 years I'm not asking them to come to that meeting. I'm asking them to come to a meeting that applies to them. We're going to do a rule change. I really, I try to start those meetings on time. I make an agenda that's really clear what we're going to talk about. Things that come up that are not going to be talked about, we put at the end of the meeting. If you pop something at the end of the meeting, most of the time, by the time you get there, no one wants to talk about it. But if they do, it's there. There's space for new items. So I think that those, and I put a time frame on each subject. So we're going to talk about this for 20 minutes. If we don't come to resolution, we're going to have to table that. And then we're going to move on. So we don't get into the long spiraling, complainy, but no solutions being presented conversations. Because I think those tend to be a negative thing for most people, and they don't want to participate in that. So how is the meeting functioning?
I kind of feel like I hear what you're saying, and I know this is going to sound, I don't mean it to sound like we're patting ourselves on the back, but over the years, I feel like because the market has run so smoothly that people are like, oh, I don't need to come to the meeting, because they're doing a great job. And I mean, we do send out an agenda. It is short and sweet. I don't put times next to the subjects, but it is short, and we basically have a time when it's going to convene and a time when it's going to adjourn. But actually now, I'm sorry, my dog is whining. If you can hear him, he wants to go out. But we definitely, I mean, now we're doing our meetings via Zoom because so many people have to travel so far. For Waitsfield, most of our board members are like between an hour and a half away. So we decided to just go with Zoom, and we were hoping that attendance was going to get raised. But Miranda, I'm not sure it really did, which was unfortunate. So sorry, I'm rambling. Sorry.
Yeah, you're great. And Hannah, I think it's probably a good time for us to go. Really the next step in this workshop is to break out into smaller groups and really just dive a bit deeper into this. So I think we will do that, and we can take there's a lot of questions popping up in the chat, and I think a lot of ideas percolating for a lot of us. So Andrew is preparing that, and we are going to join you in these breakout rooms. We're grouping you by market size, so you'll be with your market partner and others that are from markets of similar sizes. And I think, the prompt here is really still focusing on your market rules. We'll get to the conflict mapping next, but thinking about your market rules and what Hannah has presented and what you're hearing here, like what's working well at your market, what's not, and like what are action items in terms of the market rules and systems and structures that you think you can bring back. And of course, plenty of discussion to be had as well, just like how there'll be plenty of opportunity for sharing exactly what these rules are and how they look and take shape at your markets. So yeah, looking forward to joining this. So Andrew, are you ready to send us on in? Cool.
Yeah, and we're gonna go in immediately.
And we'll have 15 minutes.
We're back here with Andrew. There we go. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, did everybody have a good time?
Yes.
We ran into the thing where we're like, yeah, okay, so then the facilitator asks a question with 20 seconds left to
Hop
go.
up and shut it off.
Sorry about that, folks that were in my room.
I think you were in the room with a lot of people, so I figured that all of you would have a harder time. And when we do the next set of breakout rooms, I will make sure that none of you are in the room with 3 markets.
Just a debrief. Any realizations for any markets that they want to share? Any action items coming to light for you in the near term for rules or systems you can be adopting to just help with vendor harmony?
I think generally we talked about, exceptions we've made somewhat informally. We've somewhat codified them based on both the just to support our vendors. If our culture and our values are to support our vendors, and we have these rules that exist but are not taking into account what is truly equitable. If we do have pathways to make the rules equitable, that's just really make sure that it's clear. And that if we're, for example, supporting an older vendor with weights, or we have a system, it's voted, like everybody understand it, it's voted on, and it's supported and it's clear. So just making sure our rules are equitable, because you can't really, when you have a diversity of members, sometimes rules by themselves cannot be. And if there's an exception, that's okay, right? I think being able to make exceptions, but we want that exception to be really clearly made and people understand why the exception is happening, and then people are in support of it. Seem to be like an important takeaway.
I liked the idea, I mean, not that this is positive, but that we were discussing penalties and things. And I like the idea of, instead of getting a $30 fine, you just miss the mark, whatever you do wrong, you get notified, and the following market you miss. I think that's actually a scarier tactic than a $30 fine. Because a lot of, obviously all of our vendors are there because they make, a lot of money. They're not there just for a good time. So, or for a good time too. But so, yeah, I think that's, for me, I would be like, what? But I've got all this inventory. I planned to be there. It's the 4th of July. I didn't know I couldn't be there at 9 o'clock to set up, so I don't know. That's my, I'm super excited about that one, Miranda. Thank you. Thank you.
I see your hand up, Jill. You're muted, Jill.
I'm just curious as to what type of offense would you not allow someone to come back to market the next week, Bridget?
Yeah, it's a good question.
So we have a lot of, typically these people weed themselves out, but over the years, I've been at the market for over 20 years now as a board member and just as a vendor. And typically, people will willy-nilly come in, you're supposed to be there and set up by 8:30, cars off the field, whatever needs to be. So if you're late, people breaking down early, that's, and it's like, oh, well, and so that, no, they're not really, big offenses, but they, as a market whole, we all know when someone starts breaking down early, it triggers an effect. It's like, oh wait, it's over. And then the customers think it's over. So they're light offenses, but nonetheless, they're ruining the whole mojo of the market. So, you know, and there have been people that treat other vendors poorly. So that would be an offense. So thankfully we haven't had anything huge. So those
And
kind
this
of
conversation was kind of centered around the idea that some vendors are willingly breaking the rules because they'd rather pay the $30 and not
Yes.
follow the rule than follow the rules. So that's kind of where it came up, not just like this malicious idea that you broke a rule, but some people are willing to pay the fine to break the rule.
Right. Thank you, Miranda. Right. Thanks. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Anything else coming up for other markets? Those we haven't heard from recently? Sanford or who else?
Well, I was just asking for advice, dealing with the, how to limit the number of like fruit and vegetable vendors. You know, we can only support one flower vendor and, you know, one pretzel maker or one baked goods person in our market. And I just, if anyone had ideas for verbiage to make that rule more clear, because that's a constant problem every year for us.
There's too many applicants, and is that right, Mary Beth? For the space you have to support them?
Yeah, I mean, we have a rule saying every fruit and vegetable vendor can come, but we can't support more than one flower person and more than one cupcake maker and more than one, you know, dog treat maker or whatever. So it's the alternative categories that need limiting, and it's really hard. In our rules now, it says it's up, we limit the number, it's up to the market manager, but it's not super clear how that decision is made. And I just am constantly, I feel like people are constantly dissatisfied with that rule. So I'm having a hard time. Like I need to make it more clear so that I can refer to the rules. So I was just looking for, you know, suggestions.
We have a rule of 3 and it's, you know, stated in our guidelines, but learning from other, so I'm a crafter and craft shows, we brought in a lot of ideas. You know, we have a jury and the jury, I mean, you go to a craft show and you're juried in or you're out. It's not like you know, so, you know, we've brought in a lot of ideas, I feel, from that point of view, that, you know, the board, you know, creates a jury process and, you know, that's how we go through and then the rule of 3. But, you know, if people want to question what the board is doing or the jury's doing, then they can get involved. That is what we say, get involved. So, and that's always our comeback. So,
yeah, thanks, Bridget. Geneva, I see your hands raised, and then we're going to transition into talking about the conflict worksheets. But go ahead, Geneva.
Hi. I just wanted to give a little insight on what I do at our market when we have multiple vendors from the same line. I give them our spiel that I give to everybody. I just dealt with this last night, so that's why it's nice and fresh in my mind. And tell them that we will compare their products to the other person's. We currently have somebody that wants to come on with eggs and some other products that we already have at market that could be very saturated. And so I explain to them that, and then I tell them that they can come and fill out an application and be put on our wait list for when we have an opening up. 99% of the time, after I tell them they need insurance and appropriate licenses and to come fill out an application, they don't show up. So that usually solves a good chunk of weeding people out that way. But this person that I spoke to yesterday, they have a couple other products too that they would like to sell. So they're going to try to stop by this weekend to get an application as long as her baby goats are delivered by then. So
nice.
Can I add an aside that I didn't mention? The biggest source of conflict is not with new applicants, it's with existing vendors who have been accepted to sell meat or sell microgreens, and then they want to add flowers onto their onto their table because, you know, their wife started growing flowers, but we already have a flower vendor. So they're already established vendors, and this is where I get the conflict of the complaining and the pressure and the, you know, you don't like me, you like her better than me, and she sells daffodils and I sell tulips, and that's different. And some way to make it very clear, or have a process that's very transparent that I can rely on, so it's not
Yeah.
such a personal thing. If that
Hannah,
makes sense.
yeah, Hannah, do you want to speak to that?
I think this is a great example of sometimes when the more rules we make, the kind of the harder it is to enforce them, right? So one of the rules in the Portland market, which I adore and really made a lot of things much simpler, is if you grow it, you can sell it. So the only items we vote on is if there are buy-in items, and then we vote on those specifically. The thing about markets is that if people are bringing flowers and selling them, they will bring more flowers. If they are bringing flowers and bringing them all home, they're going to stop bringing flowers. And so some of the, like, what the market can bear within the current members does some self-selecting without a lot of work from us if there's room for that to happen.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. In the interest of keeping to time, I say we go back into a breakout room. So Andrew, I don't know if you've prepared that. But we are going to transition our focus to the conflict mapping exercise. If you didn't do the conflict mapping exercise, here's the worksheet. Feel free to look at it. Basically, it's a tool for unpacking a conflict that you've experienced at your market. I like to think that there's kind of two focal points within it. There's the Karen and Leah side of the values, the miscommunication or misinformation that's taken place. And there's also the structural side, like item D in the first part of this worksheet at the bottom of page 1. And yeah, so I would love for the conversation as much as possible. I know it's easy to digress and get into the nitty-gritty details, but seeing that, you know, this session is all about the rules and the structures in place, please try as best as possible to, when you're sharing and when we're talking about it, to be dwelling on the rules or lack of rules, and yeah, just the structures that should be in place. And I know that there might be more questions than answers at this point, but it's definitely great to identify them. And it seems like a lot of our markets have strengths and weaknesses around a lot of the things we're talking about. So hopefully there can be some follow-up sharing done for those resources, in addition to what we already have in store for you. So yeah, without further ado, we're going back into breakout rooms. I think Andrew's going to mix it up a little bit. We'll be back with you as facilitators, and really the prompts are just around how your experience was with that and how your conflicts are interacting with the structures or lack of structure at your market. So hopefully that makes some sense. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome back.
Anything anybody wants to share from that last breakout session?
Dar had some really great advice for me about how to handle situations before they escalate. We had a vendor that didn't show up a couple weeks in a row, and then I had, on the third week, I had moved vendors down to fill their space, expecting them not to come, which ended in a conflict when they did show up, and realizing that instead of waiting for that, I should have, if I had reached out after their absences, talking about, you know, why why it's important that they come, why it's important that they let me know that they're not coming. And what might happen, you know, I might have to move spaces. If I had done that ahead of time, we could have avoided, you know, the 8 a.m., the market starting, everybody's upset debacle that we did. So kind of addressing things before they're a problem is important to avoid conflict.
Totally. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Any other aha moments or big ideas? Go ahead, Jill.
Gretchen had a nice idea to survey the vendors and let them just vent maybe the 4 or 5 things that they wanted to talk about anonymously, and then we collect those responses. I think that's a really great idea, and I'm going to use it.
As we should.
Yeah, especially end of season when things are fresh. I think that's a great idea. Cool. Does anybody have any other just like ideas, rules, systems they really want to be incorporating into their markets just from these conversations?
Well, this is not so much rules, but a theme that sort of was surfaced from a conflict in a market is this, and that we feel like it's could be a valuable thing to talk about, if not today, another time, is the power differential between vendors and the market as a whole in markets that just do not have the same leverage to or the power differential that results in markets maybe not having the leverage to enforce rules with vendors that hold key places. So smaller markets that really need critical or key vendors, and the loss of them, you know, there's a constant to the market when there isn't like some waiting list of these vendors lining up. You know, I think larger markets have leverage that smaller and markets just don't necessarily always have. And the dance you have to do to, as a manager and as an executive board, to say like, how do we not alienate this vendor and also have compliance? And that compliance, we're sort of talking about it in the terms, it feels like in this space, like you either follow the rule or you don't. And I'm like, the way I feel like we've had to make it work in our market is there's like a spectrum of compliance, like, and there's a point where someone's egregiously not following a rule, but there's a spectrum of compliance, because you have to constantly work to not alienate vendors, because it is a dialogue between vendors and a market as a whole for the overall success of the market. So yeah, I mean, I just think that's something that what enforcement of rules looks like in real time has to take into consideration that, I think.
Yeah, it's like family dynamics. You can't, there's vendors you just want to keep, right? Even if they're not necessarily compliant. That's a hard one. I don't have a good
Well, again, I'm not for me and how I've operated on it. So I think there's a point where like complete non-compliance or egregious lack of compliance is more of a liability in the long term. But there again, like there's just, again, I do think there is a spectrum of compliance within that, and what negotiating like that looks like. Or
you just muted yourself.
Again, when somebody is like totally not compliant, but if you lose this vendor, like then how do you move through that process? Or how do you set up systems? How do you set up systems that your market can afford the blow of losing a critical vendor if that happens? And at least one of the things that I thought up offhand is what you do in the onset of bringing someone on to really understand their appetite and willingness to comply, and knowing that if they're a vendor that's not going to do that generally, it's more of even if they could be an incredible asset to your market, more of a liability bringing them on. It's just some things to think about in this conversation.
I just wonder about what you're talking about, because we have a situation like that where we need farmers, and so if we have farmers that are not complying, think of one in particular who doesn't bring tent weights, packs up early, brings his car on the field too early, all the things, and we don't want to lose him because he's a farmer. So I love the idea of like some sort of punishment, like you can't come next week. If you can't do these things consistently, you're not going to be able to come next week. I mean, that's pretty harsh, but, and maybe that's the answer. I don't know.
I think it does get into dynamics, like kind of what I'm hearing is, well, if the vendor then has enough power and enough community power and leverage to be able to say like, okay, if you're going to cut me out from the market, I'm just not going to come back. And then what's the impact then on the market? So it's that flip dynamic, you know, and then maybe somebody has an idea here or has seen it where it's really cooperative, right? Or that people feel like the contribution is part of a whole. Yeah.
My fear is like, what happens? It just was following through, but what happens if that vendor does show up? And then that's you tell them they're not able to show up for the next market as a penalty. And then they show up on the field. Like, I was following through on my worst nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of teeth do market organizations truly have is something I'm witnessing. Yeah, it's going on right now in Maine with a certain market that's trying to really force a vendor's hand to stop bringing in this buy-in product that's in violation of rules. Hannah, were you going to say something?
Yes. So one of the things that was occurring to me while folks were speaking before that, like, I guess first to Bridget, that totally is what you're setting yourself up for. Like, I think that's really important to see that, like, what are they going to do? Right. You're dealing with farmers. So they're like, let's see. Like, so you're going to get in that situation. So really have a plan in place. If that's something you're going to do, a plan needs to be in place. But then the thing I was going to say before, in response to Leslie, and I think Terry, I can't remember, sorry, was that I think it's okay to understand that markets are fluid, right? And sometimes some of our markets are built completely of farmers who go to the one market and only that market, and that is their entire income. And that is important to think of in Bridget's scenario, right? You may be saying, not only do you have no paycheck, but your 12 employees have no paycheck, right? So that's a big thing. That's really big. But also, let's go to, like, there's some ebb and flow in markets, right? There are other vendors who are in 10 markets every week, and markets are going to grow and they are going to shrink and they're going to grow. And that's kind of the nature of a market. And I don't see that as, I see that as part of the market, not as a flaw of a market, right? And letting a vendor hold you, dangle my participation over cooperation of a market can really change the feel of a market. So I think those are some things to consider, right? Like, I'm so important that this market can't function without me. That's not an awesome place to be sitting. So I think it's okay for markets to be fluid. Sometimes the markets are really big markets and sometimes they're small markets, and there's an ebb and flow of this thing. And I think that's okay to understand. Similar to many farms, right? Farms do the same thing. Sometimes they expand and sometimes they contract depending on the moment.
We have
I just wanted to say thank you for that information, because as much as I like that rule or that penalty, we need to think to the other side of it. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So we're approaching the last 15 minutes of our time. I think we have a couple prompts we want you all to think about. One of them is, what's still unresolved in your mind when it big picture, like with this training and these gatherings we've had, which I know have been spaced out, so maybe we're not all recollecting all that's been discussed. Both thinking about like our final time together, what would be the best way to spend our final 2 hours? Last year, we had this structure of talking about customers, because this session was about vendors and the previous session was about kind of our market structure, right? We talked about roles and organizational chart and just where the role, the responsibilities that come with roles. So definitely open to dialogue here on that for the next 10-15 minutes. I'm also going to send a follow-up group email that I would love people to just chime in on. And we did also have a survey, so some of you did respond to it in there. But now that you've gone through this second session, we have one more session with Leah and Karen focusing on skills development, and then one more focusing on, you know, market rules and systems, which we've had a great conversation about today. Leslie also just put it in the chat, that prompt. So yeah.
Yeah, if we could even take just a couple minutes now of quiet in this space. Please jot some ideas down. You can either put them in an email, send them, or you send them over to Jimmy. You can write it on a piece of paper, but this is really going to help inform what we talk about in the next session. So we want to do what's going to meet your needs. And what's still unresolved, like maybe going through that conflict worksheet is what you want to try to do next and really sit with that, or try something else with the conflict worksheet, or bring something, maybe there's a skill you feel like you really want to work on. So this is a time just for a little bit of reflection. So we'll stop talking until about 10:50. Take about just another minute to really reflect on what's still unresolved about market structures, policies, not just vendors, but everything, day of market. The annual meeting. Who's contributing, how you're making decisions, reflect on all that. And what would be useful for next time. Okay. That wraps up that time. I'll turn it back over to Jimmy.
So I just want to say we got 2 more sessions left. Next month I will send out an email to get the stipend payments going, and just a little context around those stipends. What we promised the grantor is that in the course of this training and just time we all have together, you all are working towards making interventions at your markets. So last year we found that most markets reported doing that, whether it was updating bylaws, defining new roles, like literally just confronting an issue, that didn't have any changes on the paperwork underneath it all. And we're hopeful that, maybe you have a perfect market. You probably didn't sign up for this course if that was the case. But we're hoping, so we're hoping that you're dwelling on that, or perhaps that is all in action. With the time we have left, I'd love to hear if anybody wants to speak towards what reflections they just jotted down in that time off, or if there's just any questions for the group or for the organizers here about how we're going to proceed. Helen wrote, I would like to work on a collaboration or group doc of some sort to help managers have a script to deal with common issues to practice. I got some thumbs up and love on that. Cool. That's great. I think, I'm gonna make sure that Karen and Leah, that's like a great domain for them. And we can make sure that there's a resource in generation for that. Yeah.
I just want to say I appreciate this time because I've done a lot of like personal growth when it comes around conflict, because I measured myself as like an 8 or a 9 in my comfort of conflict. But after going through these exercises, I realized that I actually do everything in my power to avoid conflict. And so this training has kind of like made me reflect on how to be more direct with conflict and how to lean back on the rules and those kind of things. And I really appreciate it, because I had a misinterpretation of what I was actually doing around conflict.
Yeah. That's great to hear, Miranda. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I'm definitely understanding more and more the term lifelong learner. The more you know, the less you know.
I'd love to see a quick raising of hands. Which of your markets require vendors to do something to help set up or break down the market? Or maybe not require, but offer that as a role within the market? Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of the Vermont markets, but not many of the main markets.
I really think that helps vendors kind of buy into this idea of that the market is a collective. And I I found that vendors, as the market manager, vendors, like sometimes the vendors like late setting up and I'll do their task and they always go up to me and they're like, oh my God, you do so much. Please don't do my task. You know, so they're very much see it as helping out the market and helping out the market manager.
I'd be curious to know what some of those tasks are, because we don't do that at our market. We have staff. So I'm just curious what those tasks are to get people.
So
engaged.
I'm the only staff member, so they do things like putting cones. So and there's a variance in things. There are things that are super heavy, like the market cart. So and then there are things that are really light, like cones. So it's cones, umbrellas, and then what we do is we split it between everybody has a task. And so for the first 3 months, you either have a morning task or an afternoon task, so taking it out or putting it away, and then you only do it for the first 3 months or the last 3 months. So it's not the whole season and you're not stuck with that task forever, but we do try to have everybody participate in some way. So there's like, and it's like putting 2 cones out. It's not a heavy lift, or putting 2 signs out, or 4 stakes. Like there's no parking signs farther down the road so we can keep traffic flowing. So little things like that.
Thanks for sharing. Looks like Hannah responded to that in the chat too, Terry, if you don't see it. Cool. I'll stay on till 11. I'd say at this point we're good to wrap it up, unless there's anything else the education team wants to share. But otherwise, I'll follow up with an email soon, and this recording will be online. It's definitely some resources to share, and would love in the group email thread, folks just have things that they discuss that they want to share, resources that they have, or like I love what Waitsfield's doing on rules and enforcement. And I don't know if there's a backbone to that in your bylaws, but that would be an awesome thing to be sharing.
Yeah, we can share through the email, whatever we can.
Great. Cool. Cool. Well, you all are dismissed or welcome to hang out and keep chatting. Nice to see you all. We'll see you
Feel
again
free
in a few
to
weeks.
ask questions if you can stay on.
Yep.
Take care.